The Mediterranean sun painted golden streaks across the calm waters as Admiral Sarah Mitchell adjusted her sailing cap and breathed in the salty morning air. After 35 years of naval service, she had finally earned this moment of peace. Her sleek 40-foot yacht, Sea Harmony, cut through the gentle waves with elegant precision, its white hull gleaming in the early light. Sarah had purchased the yacht just 6 months after her retirement ceremony, where she had been honored for her distinguished career commanding naval operations across 3 continents. The transition, from commanding aircraft carriers and destroyer fleets to navigating her own private vessel, had been surprisingly smooth. She loved the solitude, the connection with the ocean that had been her life for decades. This particular morning, she had chosen to sail in international waters off the coast of Gibraltar, a route she knew well from her military days. The area held special significance for her. It was here, 20 years earlier, that she had earned her first major commendation during a joint NATO exercise. Now, dressed in casual sailing attire instead of her formal naval uniform, she felt a bittersweet nostalgia. As she trimmed the sails and adjusted course, Sarah noticed her radio crackling with distant maritime communications. Cargo ships reporting their positions, fishing vessels coordinating their routes, and the occasional military transmission that caught her attention out of habit. She had spent so many years listening to these same frequencies that the sounds felt like a familiar symphony. The morning was perfect for sailing. Light winds, clear skies, and minimal traffic on the shipping lanes. Sarah had planned to spend the entire day at sea, perhaps anchoring near a quiet cove for lunch and an afternoon swim. She had packed a simple meal and brought along her favorite maritime history book, planning to enjoy both while surrounded by the endless blue horizon. Her yacht was well equipped for extended solo voyages. She had installed state-of-the-art navigation equipment, safety systems, and communication devices, though she rarely needed to use them. Her decades of naval experience had made her an expert in reading weather patterns, ocean currents, and maritime conditions. As the morning progressed, Sarah felt the familiar peace that only came when she was alone on the ocean. The stresses of her former command responsibilities, the weight of making decisions that affected thousands of sailors, and the constant pressure of military protocol seemed like distant memories. Here she was simply a sailor enjoying the freedom of the open sea. She adjusted her course slightly to take advantage of a favorable wind shift, her movements automatic and precise. The yacht responded beautifully, confirming her satisfaction with the purchase. She had spent months researching and testing different vessels before choosing this particular model, and every day on the water reinforced her decision. The radio chatter continued in the background, mostly routine commercial traffic and weather updates. Occasionally, she recognized call signs from naval vessels she had once commanded or worked alongside, bringing brief smiles of recognition. The maritime community was smaller than most people realized, and after 35 years, she knew many of the voices that crossed these airwaves. As noon approached, Sarah began thinking about finding a suitable anchorage for lunch. She consulted her charts and identified several promising locations, each offering the privacy and tranquility she sought. The day was unfolding exactly as she had hoped, with nothing but clear sailing ahead and the peaceful rhythm of waves against her hull. The peaceful afternoon was shattered when Sarah spotted a gray silhouette on the horizon, moving fast and heading directly toward her position. Through her binoculars, she quickly identified the approaching vessel as a naval destroyer, its distinctive profile unmistakable to her trained eye. The ship was flying American colors and appeared to be conducting some type of patrol operation. Sarah felt a mix of curiosity and mild concern as she watched the warship approach. It was unusual for military vessels to intercept civilian craft in these waters without cause, but she knew that post-9/11 security protocols had made such encounters more common. She continued on her course, maintaining proper navigation lights and ensuring her radio was functioning properly. The destroyer closed the distance with impressive speed, its powerful engines creating a substantial wake that would soon reach her much smaller yacht. Sarah began preparing for a standard maritime inspection, gathering her documentation and ensuring her vessel identification was clearly visible. She had nothing to hide and expected the encounter to be brief and routine. When the warship was Approximately half a mile away, her radio crackled to life with a commanding voice. Sailing vessel Sea Harmony, this is USS Hampton. You are ordered to stop your engines immediately and prepare for boarding. Acknowledge this transmission. Sarah reached for her radio microphone, somewhat puzzled by the stern tone and formal language. As a retired admiral, she was familiar with standard naval procedures, and this seemed unusually aggressive for a routine check of a recreational yacht in international waters. Nevertheless, she complied with the order, knowing that cooperation was always the best policy in such situations. USS Hampton, this is sailing vessel Sea Harmony. I acknowledge your transmission and am complying with your instructions. Engines stopped and standing by for boarding, she replied in the clear, professional tone that had served her well throughout her naval career. The destroyer came alongside her yacht with practiced precision, its massive bulk dwarfing her elegant sailing vessel. Sarah could see sailors in full tactical gear preparing boarding equipment, their serious expressions suggesting this was more than a routine inspection. She secured her sails and prepared to receive the boarding party, curious about what had prompted such an intense response. A rigid inflatable boat was lowered from the destroyer, carrying 4 armed sailors led by a young lieutenant who appeared to be taking this operation very seriously. As they approached her yacht, Sarah noticed their weapons were ready, though not specifically aimed at her. The lieutenant's face showed the kind of determined focus she remembered from her own junior officers during high-stakes operations. The boarding party secured their boat to her yacht and prepared to come aboard. Sarah stood calmly on her deck, hands visible and posture relaxed, drawing on decades of experience in tense maritime situations. She knew that cooperation and clear communication would resolve whatever misunderstanding had led to this dramatic encounter. Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Commander Harrison of the USS Hampton, the lead officer announced as he stepped aboard. We need to conduct a security inspection of your vessel. Please have your identification and vessel documentation ready for review. Sarah nodded respectfully and moved to retrieve her papers from the cabin. As she walked past the young officer, she noticed his crisp uniform and professional bearing, reminding her of countless junior officers she had mentored over the years. Despite the serious nature of the situation, she felt a certain pride in seeing the Navy's continued excellence in training and leadership. Lieutenant Commander Harrison examined Sarah's documents with intense scrutiny, his expression growing more serious with each page. Her yacht registration was perfectly legitimate, her passport was current, and all safety certifications were in order. However, something about the situation had clearly raised red flags that went beyond routine maritime security. Ma'am, we've received reports of suspicious activity in this area involving a vessel matching your description, Harrison explained, his tone remaining formal and cautious. We're going to need to conduct a thorough search of your boat and ask you some detailed questions about your movements over the past 24 hours. Sarah maintained her composure, though she was becoming increasingly puzzled by the escalating nature of this encounter. She had been sailing alone, far from any sensitive areas or restricted zones. Her route had been entirely within international waters, and she had maintained proper radio protocols throughout her voyage. Lieutenant Commander, I'm fully cooperative with your investigation, Sarah replied calmly. However, I'm curious about the nature of these reports. I've been sailing solo since yesterday morning, maintaining standard navigation practices and avoiding all restricted areas. The young officer gestured to his team, who began a systematic search of her yacht, while he continued questioning her. They examined her navigation equipment, checked her storage compartments, and reviewed her radio logs with professional thoroughness. Sarah watched their work with interest, recognizing the standard procedures she had once taught to her own security teams. Meanwhile, the USS Hampton maintained its position alongside her yacht, its imposing presence making the situation feel increasingly serious. Through the destroyer's bridge windows, Sarah could see officers observing the boarding operation through binoculars, their attention focused entirely on her small vessel. Ma'am, your navigation logs show you've been in this area for several hours, Harrison noted, consulting his tablet. Can you explain your specific purpose for being in these particular coordinates? This is a known transit route for commercial shipping, unusual for recreational sailing. Sarah explained her familiarity with the area from her military service and her preference for the reliable wind patterns and relative safety of the shipping lanes. She mentioned her naval background in general terms, not wanting to seem like she was trying to influence the investigation with her former rank. The search team worked methodically through every compartment of her yacht, their movements precise and professional. They examined her communications equipment, checked her provision stores, and carefully inspected any equipment that could potentially be used for surveillance or other questionable activities. As the inspection continued, Sarah noticed increased radio chatter between the boarding party and their ship. The lieutenant commander was receiving additional instructions through his earpiece, his responses consisting of brief acknowledgments that revealed nothing about the nature of their communications. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to provide more specific details about your background and the purpose of your extended time in this region," Harrison said, his tone becoming more official. "These waters have been subject to increased security monitoring due to recent intelligence reports." The situation was clearly escalating beyond a routine check, and Sarah realized that something more significant was driving this investigation. The professional competence of the boarding party impressed her, but their obvious concerns suggested they were responding to genuine security intelligence rather than conducting a random inspection. She decided it might be time to provide more complete information about her identity and background, though she was reluctant to appear as though she was trying to use her former position to avoid legitimate security procedures. The balance between cooperation and maintaining appropriate boundaries required careful consideration. Captain David Chen stood on the bridge of the USS Hampton, observing the boarding operation through powerful binoculars while monitoring radio communications from his crew. Something about this particular interdiction felt different from the routine security checks his ship had been conducting along this patrol route. His years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts when situations seemed unusual. The intelligence briefing they had received that morning had been specific, but vague. Reports of a suspicious vessel operating in their patrol area, possibly conducting surveillance activities. The description had matched the yacht they were now investigating, but as Chen watched the boarding operation unfold, he was beginning to question the reliability of their information. "Captain, the boarding party reports that all documentation appears legitimate," his communications officer announced. "The vessel owner is cooperating fully, but Lieutenant Commander Harrison requests permission to conduct extended questioning based on the subject's extensive knowledge of naval operations and familiarity with local waters." Chen frowned as he processed this information. Civilian sailors with naval knowledge were not uncommon in these waters, particularly retired military personnel who often chose to spend their golden years at sea. However, the combination of factors, the intelligence report, the yacht's presence in a sensitive area, and now evidence of military expertise, warranted continued investigation. "Tell Harrison to proceed with standard protocols but maintain professional courtesy," Chen ordered, "and have our intelligence officer review any additional information we might have about this vessel or its owner." As the search continued, Chen noticed something that made him take a closer look through his binoculars. The woman being questioned carried herself with unmistakable military bearing, straight posture, calm demeanor under pressure, and the kind of situational awareness that came from years of command experience. Her responses to his boarding party's questions were precise and cooperative, showing none of the nervousness or confusion typical of civilians in such situations. 20 minutes later, his intelligence officer approached with a tablet containing additional research on their subject. "Captain, I've been running background checks on the yacht's owner," the officer reported. "Sarah Mitchell, age 58, retired from the Navy 6 months ago. But sir, you need to see her service record." Chen took the tablet and began scrolling through the information, his expression changing as he read. The woman they were questioning wasn't just a retired sailor. She was a retired flag officer with one of the most distinguished service records he had ever seen. Multiple combat deployments, several major commendations, and a career culminating in operational command of some of the Navy's most important missions. "My God," Chen muttered as he continued reading. "She's Admiral Sarah Mitchell. She commanded Task Force 7 during the Mediterranean crisis. I served under her operational authority during my first deployment as a lieutenant. The intelligence officer nodded grimly. Sir, there's more. According to her record, she was specifically commended for her expertise in the exact waters where we found her yacht. She probably knows this area better than our own navigation team. Captain Chen felt a mixture of professional embarrassment and growing concern about the intelligence that had led to this encounter. Admiral Mitchell had been one of the Navy's most respected commanders, known for her tactical brilliance and unwavering integrity. The idea that she could be involved in any suspicious activity seemed not just unlikely but almost insulting to her distinguished service. Sir, what are your orders regarding the boarding operation? His communications officer asked, noting the captain's obvious discomfort with the developing situation. Chen studied the information on the tablet once more, cross-referencing Admiral Mitchell's service record with his own memories of serving under her command. He remembered her reputation for excellence, her dedication to naval traditions, and her absolute commitment to American security interests. The suggestion that such an officer could pose any threat seemed increasingly absurd. Prepare a message to Lieutenant Commander Harrison, Chen decided. Tell him to maintain current procedures but exercise maximum courtesy, and get me a direct line to Fleet Intelligence. I want to know exactly what information led to this interdiction order. Captain Chen's call to Fleet Intelligence revealed a troubling series of miscommunications that had led to the current situation. The original intelligence report had been based on surveillance of a yacht in these waters, but crucial identifying details had been incorrectly transmitted through the chain of command. What should have been a routine notification about a retired flag officer enjoying recreational sailing had somehow been transformed into a security alert about suspicious activity. Captain, this is embarrassing, the intelligence coordinator admitted over the secure line. Our initial report noted Admiral Mitchell's presence in the area as a matter of routine tracking of former senior officers. Somehow, when that information was processed and forwarded, it got flagged as a potential security concern rather than a courtesy notification. Chen felt his anger rising as he realized his crew had been ordered to intercept and detain one of the Navy's most distinguished retired admirals, based on what amounted to bureaucratic incompetence. The woman they were treating as a potential threat had spent decades protecting American interests at sea, and deserved far better treatment from the service she had served with such distinction. Meanwhile, aboard the yacht, Lieutenant Commander Harrison was growing increasingly uncomfortable with his mission as he questioned Admiral Mitchell further. Her responses demonstrated not only extensive naval knowledge but also the kind of strategic thinking and operational awareness that came from years of high-level command responsibility. Ma'am, your familiarity with naval procedures and local maritime conditions is quite extensive for a civilian sailor, Harrison observed, still unaware of her true identity. Can you explain how you acquired such detailed knowledge of military operations and protocols? Sarah had been patient with the questioning, understanding the importance of security procedures even when they seemed unnecessary. However, she was beginning to sense that something more than routine caution was driving this investigation. The intensity of the search and the nature of the questions suggested they suspected her of something more serious than a paperwork violation. Lieutenant Commander, I believe there may be some confusion about my background, Sarah said calmly. I mentioned that I had naval experience, but perhaps I should be more specific about the nature of that service. She reached into her wallet and retrieved a card she rarely had occasion to use anymore, her retired military identification, complete with her final rank and security clearance information. She handed it to Harrison with the same calm professionalism she had maintained throughout the encounter. Harrison looked at the ID card, and his expression immediately changed from suspicious alertness to shocked recognition. The card identified the woman he had been questioning as Admiral Sarah E. Mitchell, United States Navy, retired. The photograph matched perfectly, and the security features confirmed its authenticity. "Oh my God," Harrison whispered, his face flushing with embarrassment. "Ma'am, Admiral, I had no idea. Our orders were to investigate a suspicious vessel, not to board a flag officer's yacht." The lieutenant commander immediately activated his radio, his voice urgent as he contacted his captain. USS Hampton, this is the boarding party leader. We have a significant development that requires your immediate attention. The vessel owner is Admiral Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy, retired. Please advise how to proceed. Captain Chen's voice came back immediately, relief evident even through the radio static. Harrison, extend our sincere apologies to Admiral Mitchell and request permission to come aboard personally. We have some explaining to do. The entire atmosphere of the encounter shifted instantly as Harrison's team realized they had been investigating one of their own former commanders. The young sailors who had been conducting the search now stood at attention, their earlier suspicion replaced by the respect due to a senior flag officer, even in retirement. Sarah graciously accepted their apologies, understanding better than anyone how intelligence failures and communication breakdowns could lead to such situations. She had dealt with similar problems throughout her own career and knew that the professionalism of the boarding party reflected well on their training, even if their orders had been based on flawed information. Captain Chen arrived at Admiral Mitchell's yacht 30 minutes later, bringing with him a formal apology and a detailed explanation of the intelligence failure that had led to the unfortunate encounter. As he stepped aboard the Sea Harmony, he was struck by how graciously the Admiral had handled what could have been a deeply embarrassing situation for his command. Admiral Mitchell, on behalf of the United States Navy and the crew of the USS Hampton, I offer our sincere apologies for this incident, Chen began, his tone respectful but clearly mortified by the circumstances. A series of communication errors led to your yacht being misidentified as a vessel of interest in our security patrol. Sarah smiled warmly, gesturing for the captain to join her in the yacht's comfortable cockpit area. Captain Chen, please don't let this incident concern you. I've seen enough intelligence failures in my career to know they're an unfortunate reality of naval operations. Your crew conducted themselves professionally throughout, and that's what matters most. Chen was impressed by her graciousness, though he remained troubled by the implications of the mistake. Ma'am, I want you to know that we've already initiated a review of our intelligence procedures to prevent similar incidents. This kind of error reflects poorly on our operational standards. As they talked, Sarah learned that Captain Chen had indeed served under her operational authority during his early career, though they had never met personally. He spoke with obvious respect about her reputation and the impact her leadership had on the officers who served in her command structure. Admiral, your tactical innovations during the Mediterranean crisis are still taught at the Naval War College, Chen mentioned. I used several of your coordination protocols during my own command cruise last year. It's an honor to finally meet you, even under these unusual circumstances. The conversation gradually shifted from apologies to professional discussion as two naval officers shared experiences and perspectives on maritime operations. Sarah found herself enjoying the interaction, missing the camaraderie and intellectual stimulation of working with fellow naval professionals. Lieutenant Commander Harrison and his boarding party had returned to the destroyer, but not before expressing their own respect and gratitude for Admiral Mitchell's understanding. The young lieutenant commander had been particularly impressed by her calm handling of what could have been a confrontational situation. As the afternoon progressed, Captain Chen extended an invitation that surprised Sarah. Admiral, if you have no other plans, we'd be honored to have you aboard the Hampton for dinner this evening. Our crew would appreciate the opportunity to meet a distinguished flag officer, and frankly, it would help restore some dignity to this day's events. Sarah accepted the invitation graciously, curious to see how the modern Navy compared to her own experience. She secured her yacht alongside the destroyer and joined the crew for an informal dinner that became an impromptu leadership seminar. As junior officers peppered her with questions about naval strategy and career development, the evening proved to be one of the most enjoyable Sarah had experienced since her retirement. She shared stories of her career, offered advice to young officers, and gained insights into the current challenges facing the Navy. The crew's enthusiasm and professionalism reminded her why she had been so proud to serve. As the sun set over the Mediterranean, Sarah prepared to return to her yacht with a renewed appreciation for the naval service and the quality of its current leadership. What had begun as an embarrassing case of mistaken identity had evolved into a meaningful connection with a new generation of sailors. Captain Chen walked her back to her yacht, their conversation continuing as they discussed the future of naval operations and the importance of maintaining maritime security. Admiral, this encounter has been far more valuable than any routine patrol, Chen observed. Your perspective on current challenges has given us much to consider. Sarah cast off her lines and prepared to continue her sailing adventure, enriched by an unexpected reminder of the bonds that connected all those who had chosen to serve at sea. The incident would become a story she would share with other retired officers, a reminder that the Navy's traditions of honor and professionalism continued to guide its operations even when mistakes were made.